Funny, isn't it? How one moment, one small thing, can wake you up from a dream you didn't even know you were living? For me, it was a birthday coupon from my wife, $10 off at a chain restaurant I didn't even like. She and her lover laughed, but I wasn't laughing. My name is Michael, and yeah, that's how it started. You ever had one of those moments where you suddenly feel like the background noise of your life drops away, and you're left staring at the ugly truth you've been too afraid to admit? That was me standing in the middle of my own backyard, red Solo cup in hand, wearing a smile so fake it made my cheeks ache. The evening was supposed to be low-key. Just a casual barbecue, a few friends, some beers, the smell of grilled burgers hanging heavy in the air. The kind of night where nobody expected much except a full plate and maybe a little laughter. I didn't need a grand party. I didn't want fireworks or speeches. Just her. Rachel. She always had a way of lighting up a room. Even now, I caught her out of the corner of my eye, that easy laugh, that toss of her hair, and for a second, it still looked like magic. Until she walked up to me. "Happy birthday, babe," Rachel said, voice bright but off. She pressed a thin envelope into my hand with a quick kiss on the cheek, already turning away before I even had a chance to react. Inside? A $10 off coupon. Generic. Soulless. Like something she grabbed last minute on the way here. My chest tightened, but I forced a grin, slipping the coupon into my back pocket like it didn't matter. Like I wasn't already bleeding a little inside. And then I saw him, Thomas, leaning casually against the patio railing, beer in hand, laughing with her in that way that made my gut twist. Too easy. Too familiar. Rachel's hand brushed his arm, lightly, like it meant nothing, but Thomas, he didn't even flinch. Like they had a whole secret world between them that didn't include me. Can you imagine that? Being the guest at your own party, smiling while the person you love laughs a little too warmly with someone else? I raised my cup in a mock toast to no one in particular and took a long sip, the cheap beer burning hotter than it should have. My mind raced, trying to tell me I was overreacting, trying to cling to some scrap of normal. But deep down, a colder voice, the one I usually drowned out, whispered something I didn't want to hear. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. The conversation swirled around me, laughter, the clink of bottles, the sizzle of meat on the grill, but I felt like I was floating outside of it all, watching myself from somewhere distant. Rachel caught my eye then. For a brief second, her smile faltered, just enough for me to catch the flicker of guilt underneath. And that was when it hit me. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't reading too much into things. I wasn't crazy. I was finally seeing the truth, naked and ugly and impossible to unsee. Thomas said something that made her laugh again, that bright, musical laugh I used to think was mine, and something inside me cracked. But I didn't make a scene. I didn't storm out or demand an explanation. No, I smiled. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do when your world starts falling apart is nothing at all. Just smile, nod, and watch who keeps laughing when they think you're not looking. The party blurred on. The sky bruised into twilight. The lights strung across the backyard flickered on, casting everything in a soft, forgiving glow. Forgiving enough to hide a lot of things. But not from me. Not anymore. I knew then, in a way that sank into my bones, that tonight wasn't just my birthday. It was the funeral for the man I used to be. And as I stood there, surrounded by the people who claimed to care about me, I made a silent promise to myself. This wouldn't break me. Not the way they expected it to. Not even close. Later that night, long after the last guest had wandered off and the backyard was littered with half-empty cups and forgotten plates, I found myself alone on the porch swing. It was one of those warm nights where the city hums just beneath the surface, not loud, not quiet. Just alive in a way you can feel more than hear. The lights from downtown glittered against the black sky, distant and indifferent. And there I was, sitting with a bottle of beer gone warm in my hand, swinging back and forth like a man too stubborn to admit he didn't know where to go next. I pulled the coupon out of my pocket, that cheap slip of paper folded so neatly it might as well have been a letter from the executioner. Turning it over in my hands, I chuckled under my breath. A sound so hollow it didn't even feel like it came from me. It wasn't about the coupon. It never really was. It was about what it represented, the effort she didn't make, the care she couldn't even bother to fake. When did I become someone who accepted scraps and called it love? The city stretched out before me like a promise I hadn't cashed in yet. Bright lights, moving cars, endless streets. Somewhere out there, A version of me was still alive, the version who didn't have to check his own birthday gift for signs of betrayal. I took a slow breath and let the night air fill my lungs. I had a choice to make, didn't I? Keep pretending, or finally admit what I'd known deep down for longer than I wanted to face. Rachel's betrayal wasn't sudden. It wasn't sharp like a knife. It was slow, like a rope tightening around your chest a little more each day until one morning you wake up gasping and don't even know when it started. That realization, it didn't crash into me. It didn't knock the wind out of me. It settled. Heavy. Permanent. Like a new tenant in the house of my mind, rearranging all the furniture without asking. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the swing creak beneath me, the chain groaning softly against the frame. I used to think love was about holding on no matter what, fighting for the people you cared about, even when they didn't make it easy. But sitting there, staring out at the city, I realized something else. Sometimes love means knowing when to let go. Because fighting for someone who stopped fighting for you? That's not love. That's self-destruction dressed up in hope. The truth of it hit me cleaner than anything had in months. Rachel wasn't the enemy. Not really. The enemy was the part of me that needed her to be someone she wasn't anymore. The part of me that kept patching holes in a ship that had already sunk. I set the coupon down beside me on the swing, watching it flutter slightly in the breeze like it was trying to make a run for it. Maybe I should let it. Maybe it was time to stop patching. Stop begging. Stop bleeding for people who only noticed when it was convenient. The skyline blinked at me, cold, beautiful, endless. Somewhere out there, a better life was waiting. Not louder, not flashier, just honest. The porch creaked again as I pushed my feet gently against the ground, rocking back and forth like I could lull myself into peace. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat there, heavy and hollow, letting the quiet sadness wrap around me like a second skin. It wasn't a breakdown. It was a break. A clean, sharp line drawn between the man I had been and the man I was about to become. Tomorrow, the world would look the same. The same streets. The same skyline. Maybe even the same tired smile when Rachel looked at me across the kitchen table. But something fundamental had shifted tonight. And once you see the cracks, you can never go back to pretending the wall is whole. The next morning, I woke up with a kind of silence that didn't feel peaceful anymore. Rachel was already gone, probably out grabbing coffee or pretending to run errands. I didn't ask. I didn't care. Not today. The apartment felt stale, like the walls themselves were tired of pretending everything was fine. I brewed a pot of coffee, black and bitter, and carried it to the small desk in the corner of the living room, the one Rachel liked to call Michael's command center, back when we still joked about things like that. Booting up my laptop, I stared at the login screen for a long minute. Not because I doubted what I was about to do, but because I wanted to remember how this felt. The click of the keyboard, the faint hum of the fan kicking on, the sunlight crawling across the hardwood floor, slow and golden. This is the moment, I thought. The one you'll look back on someday and know, this is where you started saving yourself. I typed in the password for the confidential shareholder database, the same one I hadn't touched in months. It wasn't flashy, just a simple, secured interface. No bells. No whistles. But power doesn't always look like power. Sometimes it's just a few quiet lines of code. A simple confirmation screen. I navigated to the ownership records. There it was, my name, still listed as the controlling shareholder of the company Rachel admired so much. The one she talked about like it was some mythical prize she'd one day help me expand. Funny thing about admiration. Sometimes it turns into envy. Sometimes into something worse. I hovered the mouse over the Update Records button, my fingers steady. Technically, nothing needed changing. But I added a note anyway, a quiet little legal reinforcement that locked my shares tighter under my control. Nothing Rachel could touch. Nothing Thomas could whisper about over cheap drinks and secret glances. A small move. A silent one. But it felt like slamming a steel door closed with both hands. The system chirped softly, update confirmed, and just like that, I leaned back in the chair, letting out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The bitter taste of last night still lingered on my tongue. The hurt wasn't gone, not even close. But sitting there, sunlight creeping up my arm, I felt something else start to flicker to life. Not anger, not revenge. Something quieter, something cleaner. Control. Not the kind you use to manipulate or punish. Not the petty kind that tries to hurt back. This was the kind of control that comes from knowing who you are and what you refuse to lose anymore. I closed the laptop gently, almost reverently, and sat there for a few more minutes, letting the feeling settle deep into my bones. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't stuck. And I sure as hell wasn't waiting around for someone else to decide my value. Rachel could laugh across patios all she wanted. She could hand out coupons like apologies wrapped in cheap paper. But me? I had the keys to something bigger. And the beauty of it was she didn't even know she'd already lost. Outside, the city kept moving, cars honking, people rushing, lives spinning on without a second thought. But in that small, sunlit corner of my living room, the world shifted. Not loudly, not with fireworks, just irrevocably. And sometimes that's enough. More than enough. Corporate luncheons, they always looked the same, didn't they? Polished floors, half-wilted flower arrangements in the center of every table, that faint smell of catered food trying to mask the tension in the air. People dressed a little nicer than usual, voices a little too loud, laughs a little too forced. It was perfect. I walked into the glass-walled conference hall around noon, letting the buzz of conversation wash over me. I spotted Rachel immediately, her bright red dress popping against the sea of navy suits and muted grays. And beside her, like a loyal shadow, stood Thomas. He was smoothing down his cheap blazer, looking a little too proud, a little too comfortable. They didn't notice me at first, which was fine. I wasn't there to make a scene. I was there to make a point. The company had been planning this luncheon for months, a vision-forward event meant to impress a few investors and celebrate the company's steady growth. Everyone knew it was important. Everyone knew appearances mattered. And that's why it was so easy to set the trap. I made sure Thomas was the one scheduled to give the presentation on our latest initiative, a project he'd bragged about having inside knowledge on. I let it happen. I even smiled when his name went up on the itinerary. And now it was showtime. I grabbed a seat at one of the front tables, right where I could see everything. I didn't clap when Thomas was introduced. I just watched. He took the stage, adjusting the mic like he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment. "Good afternoon, everyone," he started, flashing a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Today, I want to walk you through our innovative new strategy for market expansion." He clicked the remote in his hand, and a sleek presentation popped onto the giant screen behind him. For a few minutes, he coasted. Surface-level stats, buzzwords, generic corporate jargon that could have been copied from any mediocre marketing blog. But the deeper he went, the thinner the veneer got. Someone from the back, one of the senior partners, raised a hand. "Thomas, can you walk us through the compliance parameters for Phase 2? Specifically the regulatory benchmarks we'll need to meet." Thomas blinked. Just once. But it was enough. Yeah, great question," he fumbled, flipping back through his notes. "So, for compliance, we'll, obviously ensure alignment with, industry standards and stuff. Industry standards and stuff." You could feel the mood in the room shift, subtle at first, like a ripple across still water. I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers under my chin. Another exec chimed in, sharper this time. "Which specific standards, Thomas? Can you name the governing bodies for this sector?" Thomas shuffled his papers like they might suddenly sprout answers. His face flushed slightly. Rachel shifted in her seat, smoothing the hem of her dress with jerky little movements. She felt it too. The slow, inevitable collapse. Thomas stammered something about federal compliance divisions, a phrase so vague and misapplied that it drew a visible frown from two of the board members. Silence thickened. People started whispering at their tables, eyes darting between each other. Finally, the COO, a man who rarely spoke unless he had something deadly to say, cleared his throat. "Thomas," he said evenly, "it sounds like you're not fully briefed on the specifics of this initiative. Perhaps you should have deferred to someone with more detailed operational knowledge." That landed like a hammer. Thomas stood there, blinking, the realization sinking in painfully slow. He was being called out, professionally undressed in front of everyone who mattered. He tried to smile it off, made a weak joke about being too busy innovating to memorize regulations. It didn't land. It didn't even make a dent. The room cooled several degrees in an instant. I caught Rachel's eyes across the room, just for a second. And what I saw wasn't anger. It was fear. Not for Thomas. For herself. Because if the man she'd been whispering to behind my back couldn't even handle a simple luncheon without unraveling, what did that say about her judgment? What did that say about the future she thought she was building? The presentation limped to a close. A few polite claps followed, the kind you give to a toddler who tries really hard but still colors outside the lines. Thomas slunk back to his seat, his face a study in barely contained humiliation. I smiled thinly as I sipped my coffee. No shouting. No accusations. Just a clean, public reminder that not all foundations are built to last, especially the ones constructed on lies. The luncheon ended like a slow collapse, polite goodbyes, tight smiles, too much unsaid hanging in the air. I didn't rush out. I stayed back, letting the herd thin out until only a few stragglers were left gathering coats and finishing half-empty glasses of wine. Rachel disappeared somewhere near the back. I spotted her red dress slip through a side door with one of her closest friends, Jenna. They thought they were alone. They weren't. I moved quietly down the hall, drawn by something I couldn't name. Anger, maybe. Curiosity. Hope. I don't know. Their voices drifted out from a little alcove by the windows. It's not what you think, Rachel was saying, her voice low and brittle. Jenna sighed. Then what is it, wretch? Because from where I'm standing, it looks bad. There was a pause, long enough to hear the city noise bleeding faintly through the glass. Rachel let out a shaky breath. I feel trapped. Okay? Like I'm stuck in this stale marriage where we just exist next to each other. I didn't mean for any of this to happen with Thomas. I didn't even want it. Not really. I stood frozen just beyond the corner, feeling every word land like a small, sharp cut. Jenna's voice was softer now. Then why? Rachel sniffed. I could picture her rubbing her temple, the way she always did when she didn't want to face something. I don't know, she whispered. Stupidity? Fear? I guess. I kept thinking Michael would notice, would fight for me. But he didn't. He just kept smiling, acting like everything was fine. She laughed bitterly, and when Thomas paid attention, it felt easy. Stupid. I know. God, I hate myself for it. Jenna didn't rush to comfort her, didn't tell her she was blameless. Good, because she wasn't. Rachel's voice cracked on the next words. I didn't think I could lose him. I thought he needed me too much to walk away. Silence. The kind that says more than words ever could. I stepped back before they could spot me, before Rachel could see the way my hands were shaking, not with rage, not with grief, but with something quieter, something sadder. Pity, not just for her, for both of us. Because somehow, without even realizing it, we'd built a life where love had to scream just to be heard, and neither of us had been listening. Later that night, the house was quiet. Rachel was asleep, or pretending to be, on her side of the bed, her breathing slow and even. I sat at the dining table, pen in hand, a blank sheet of paper in front of me. The words spilled out faster than I expected. I wrote about the early days, how I'd memorized the way she laughed when she was truly happy, how I'd known exactly how she liked her coffee before she ever had to ask. I wrote about the dreams we used to share, the ones we'd whispered into the dark before real life crowded them out. And then I wrote the truth, that somewhere along the way, I stopped believing I deserved better than a love built on crumbs. That staying smiling through it wasn't loyalty. It was fear. Fear of admitting I was holding on to something that didn't exist anymore. The pen moved steadily, the ink soaking the page with everything I hadn't been able to say out loud. I forgave her, in that letter, not because she deserved it, but because carrying all that anger was just another kind of chain. And I was tired of chains. When I finished, I set the pen down and stared at the letter for a long time. I thought about folding it neatly and leaving it on her pillow. I thought about the look on her face when she read it, whether it would crack something open inside her, or whether it would just pass through her like a breeze she barely noticed. But in the end, I didn't do either. I took the letter outside to the fire pit in the backyard, the same one where we'd once roasted marshmallows and made stupid, drunken promises we'd never keep. I struck a match and watched the flames lick at the paper, curling the edges, devouring the words until there was nothing left but ash floating into the night sky. I stood there for a long time, watching the embers die out, feeling lighter than I had in years. Sometimes closure doesn't come from another person's apology. Sometimes it comes from letting go of the apology you thought you needed. And that night, for the first time, I slept without a weight on my chest. Not happy, not healed, but free. A few days later, I found myself back at headquarters, standing outside one of the smaller boardrooms, flipping through a folder I didn't really need to read. Meetings blurred together lately, check-ins, strategy sessions, a lot of people talking without really saying much. But today wasn't about meetings. It was about timing. And as if the universe was listening, the door to the boardroom swung open, and there he was, Thomas, alone. He stepped into the hallway, head bent low over his phone, thumbs flying across the screen. Probably texting Rachel. Or maybe someone else by now. Guys like him didn't exactly specialize in loyalty. I almost let him pass. Almost. Instead, I shifted my stance just enough to catch his eye. He looked up, startled for a second, then plastered that fake, confident grin across his face. The one he thought had how rattled he really was. "Michael," he said, forcing a laugh. "Didn't expect to see you lurking out here." I smiled easily, tucking the folder under my arm. "Just making the rounds," I said. "You know how it is." He nodded a little too fast. His posture was wrong, a little too stiff, a little too alert. Like a guy who knows he's sitting on a house of cards but is praying the wind doesn't blow. For a second, we just stood there in the echoing hallway, the silence stretching thin between us. And then I let the hook slip, casual, effortless. "By the way," I said, pretending to glance back at the boardroom. "Good job the other day. Heard you handled that expansion project brilliantly." Thomas's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. His fingers tightened around his phone. "Oh, thanks, man," he said, his voice trying to stay light. "You know, just doing my part." I leaned in slightly friendly, almost conspiratorial. "It's good to know the company's in such capable hands." A slight pause. Then I dropped it, just a thread, just enough to snag. "Ownership's not as scattered as some folks might think, though," I added lightly. "Still pretty centralized." I watched the words hit him. His brow furrowed, just for a blink. Confusion first, then suspicion flickering in his eyes like the first warning tremor before an earthquake. "Centralized?" he repeated, trying to sound casual. I shrugged, feigning indifference. "Yeah, you know how it is. Some things look more complicated from the outside than they really are." "Yes, that's what keeps people guessing." Thomas laughed, a brittle, empty sound, and shoved his phone into his pocket. "Well, I'm sure the higher-ups have it all figured out," he said, his voice tight around the edges. I just smiled, easy and unreadable. "Always have," I said simply. "Always will." For a moment, neither of us moved. Then Thomas mumbled something about a meeting he was late for and disappeared down the hall, his footsteps a little too quick, a little too loud. I watched him go, feeling a strange, quiet satisfaction settle into my chest. I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't thrown a punch, hadn't even accused him of anything. But the seed had been planted. And if there's one thing about weak men, they don't need much to start unraveling. All it takes is the tiniest crack in their certainty, and pretty soon, the whole mask falls apart. I turned back to the boardroom, pushing the door open like nothing had happened. Because as far as anyone else knew, nothing had. Not yet. But it was coming. And for once, I wasn't chasing the fallout. I was waiting for it. The next big event was held in the largest ballroom downtown. High ceilings, chandeliers dripping with light, tables dressed in crisp white linen. It was the kind of setting designed to make people feel important. Perfect. I stood near the stage, sipping water from a heavy glass, watching the room fill up. Executives, department heads, a few minor shareholders, all mingling, shaking hands, pretending none of them were quietly jockeying for better seats at the table. Rachel arrived a few minutes later, arm hooked loosely through Thomas's. Her smile was stretched too wide. His collar already looked too tight. A few polite nods, a few strained greetings, and then the ceremony started. It was mostly the usual stuff. Speeches about growth, about resilience, about the future. Words that sounded impressive if you didn't listen too closely. And then it was my turn. I stepped up to the podium, my footsteps slow and measured. Rachel caught my eye from the crowd, gave a small, encouraging smile. She had no idea. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice steady, warm. "Tonight isn't just about celebrating what we've built. It's about recognizing the people who made it possible." A few polite claps. I let my gaze sweep the room. "So before we move into the new structural announcements, I want to take a moment to thank someone very important." A pause. A heartbeat. I looked straight at Rachel. "Rachel," I said, letting the name settle in the air. "Your support over the years has been invaluable." Her face softened instantly, her shoulders relaxing, as if she thought this was some grand olive branch. Thomas smirked beside her, oblivious. I smiled, gently, almost sadly, and turned back to the room. And as we move into the next phase of our journey, difficult decisions have to be made. Structures need to evolve. Roles need to change. Another beat of silence. You could feel the collective breath holding. "And effective immediately," I said smoothly. "We're beginning a realignment of executive responsibilities, starting with Thomas Whitmore." The room froze. Thomas's smirk cracked right down the middle. I kept my tone light, almost apologetic. Thomas's contributions have been noted, but the direction we're moving requires a different kind of leadership. We appreciate his service and wish him the best in his future endeavors. Polite, sterile, the kind of corporate execution that leaves no blood but all the wounds. HR reps flanked the sides of the room almost invisibly, ready to walk him through the exit procedures before he could even process what had happened. Thomas stood there, pale and blinking, like he was waiting for someone to yell April Fools. Rachel reached for his arm instinctively, confusion and panic blooming across her face. And that's when it really hit her. Not just that he was being cut loose, but that it was personal, that somewhere, somehow, she'd bet on the wrong horse, and the stable doors had already been locked. I stepped back from the podium to polite, slightly confused applause. No chaos, no shouting, just the slow, devastating realization seeping through the room like smoke. I didn't look at Rachel again as I left the stage. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what she was feeling, because once upon a time, I'd felt it too. The slow, sick recognition that the ground beneath you isn't solid, it's a trapdoor, and it's already open. It didn't take long. As soon as the polite applause faded and the crowd began buzzing in low, uneasy murmurs, Thomas pushed through the cluster of chairs, his face flushed red and blotchy. He caught up to me just past the catering tables, his voice strained and too loud for the setting. "Michael, wait. Look, man, this is a mistake. You don't have to do this." I didn't slow down. I didn't even look at him at first. I could hear the desperation in every word, the frantic scraping for something, anything, to hang on to. Thomas jogged a step to get in front of me, blocking my path. "You know I'm good for the company," he said, his hands half lifting in a gesture that was supposed to be persuasive but just looked pathetic. "I mean, come on, man, we can work something out." Whatever you heard, he stopped himself. Too late, because even he knew there was no way to walk that back. I finally met his eyes then. Calm, quiet, unforgiving. "You'll want to speak with HR," I said, nodding toward the two dark-suited reps who had positioned themselves by the far doors, clipboards in hand. They didn't look impatient. They didn't need to. They already knew how this ended. Thomas looked between them and me, his face crumbling by degrees. "You don't have to do this," he whispered. It wasn't even bravado anymore. Just fear, raw and simple. But he was wrong. I didn't have to do this. For myself. For every silent betrayal. For every moment I swallowed my pride just to keep the peace while the ground eroded beneath my feet. For the version of me who stayed too long, forgave too easily, loved too blindly. I offered him a small, polite smile, the same one he used to throw around so carelessly, and stepped around him without another word. The HR reps moved in smoothly, guiding him away toward the private exit like he was a guest overstaying his welcome. I didn't watch him leave. Not really. My eyes found Rachel instead. She was standing by the far wall, half hidden by a marble pillar, her arms wrapped around herself like she was cold. She wasn't crying. She wasn't running after him. She just watched. Watched the man she had gambled everything on be escorted out like he was nothing more than a mistake on a spreadsheet. Her gaze lifted and met mine across the room. For a moment, everything else fell away. The murmured conversations, the clinking of glasses, the careful avoidance of eye contact by everyone else. It was just us. Rachel's eyes were glassy, wide with something that wasn't quite apology, wasn't quite regret. It was recognition. Finally understanding the rules of the game she'd been playing without knowing she was outmatched from the beginning. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I just held her gaze for one long heartbeat. And then I turned and walked away, my footsteps steady, my heart oddly calm. Because this wasn't revenge. This wasn't about hurting her or Thomas or anyone else. This was about reclaiming the part of myself that believed I deserved better. And for once, I wasn't the one being left behind, picking through the ashes. I was the one walking away, leaving the fire to burn without a backward glance. The parking garage was almost empty by the time I reached it. The echoes of my footsteps bounced off the concrete walls, the cool night air carrying the faint smell of gasoline and rain. My car sat in the corner where I'd left it earlier, a small island of familiarity in a night that had stripped away everything else. I tossed my jacket onto the passenger seat, keys dangling loosely in my hand. Freedom was so close I could taste it. And that's when I heard her. "Michael, wait." The voice was small, broken at the edges. I turned slowly, already knowing who I'd see. Rachel stood a few feet away, framed under the harsh fluorescent lights. Her heels clicked against the concrete as she moved closer, hesitating like she wasn't sure she had the right to cross the space between us. Her face was a wreck, mascara smudged, eyes red and glassy, cheeks streaked with fresh tears. I didn't say anything. I didn't move. I just watched her, waiting. Rachel opened her mouth once, then closed it again, like she was trying to find the least shameful way to start. There wasn't one. Finally, she whispered, "I'm sorry." It wasn't grand. It wasn't wrapped in excuses. It just hung there, raw and trembling. "I was scared," she said, her voice cracking. "I made choices I can't undo. I thought if I could just feel something different, anything, it would fix what I was too afraid to face." She took a shaky breath. "I blamed you. For things that were never your fault. For things I couldn't even admit to myself." A tear slipped down her cheek, and she swiped at it angrily, like she didn't deserve the comfort of crying. "I never stopped loving you," she said. I got so lost. I forgot how to fight for what mattered." Another step closer. Still, I didn't speak. I wanted to let her say it all. Let her pour it out, not because it would change anything, but because she needed to hear herself say it. Because sometimes the truth only matters once it's been dragged, kicking and screaming, into the light. Rachel's hands twisted together in front of her. "I know you can't forgive me," she whispered. "I wouldn't, if I were you. But I needed you to know. It wasn't about Thomas. It was never about him. It was about me being too weak to face the life we built, and too cowardly to believe I deserved it." Her shoulders sagged then, like all the fight had drained out of her at once. For a second, just a second, I remembered the girl I fell in love with, the one who used to dance barefoot in our living room, laughing so hard she couldn't breathe. But that girl was gone. And maybe the saddest part was, she hadn't been taken from me. She'd walked away from herself long before she ever walked away from me. I tucked my keys into my pocket and took a step forward. Rachel stiffened, bracing for, I don't know what. Anger, accusation, maybe even a final, desperate plea for another chance. Instead, I just reached out and gently squeezed her shoulder. A small, human gesture. Nothing more. "Thank you for telling me," I said quietly. No rage. No bitterness. Just the kind of exhausted mercy you offer someone when you finally realize their pain doesn't have to be your burden anymore. She nodded, biting her lip to keep from sobbing outright. I turned, opened my car door, and slid behind the wheel without another word. As I pulled out of the parking space, I caught a last glimpse of her in the rearview mirror, standing alone in the harsh light, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel vindicated. Just a heavy, aching kind of sadness. Some endings don't come with fireworks. Some come with the quiet acceptance that not every broken thing can be put back together. And that's okay, because sometimes letting go isn't the same as losing. Sometimes it's the only way to finally win. The city lights blurred as I drove. Not from speed. Not from tears. Just the simple motion of leaving, of letting everything smear behind me while the road stretched clean and endless ahead. In the rearview mirror, I caught one last glimpse of her. Rachel, shrinking smaller with every second. No dramatic goodbyes. No desperate chasing. Just her standing there, arms wrapped tight around herself, under the cold fluorescent lights of a garage that suddenly felt way too big. I tightened my grip on the wheel and looked forward. There was nothing left to say. Maybe there never had been. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed awake, trying to figure out how to fix what was broken. All the ways I twisted myself into smaller shapes just to keep the illusion alive. And now I realize something I should have seen from the start. Some people don't need to be fought for. Some endings aren't tragedies. They're mercy. The city stretched out before me, messy and alive, full of noise and mistakes and second chances I hadn't even imagined yet. I didn't know where I was going. Didn't need to. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't driving toward something broken, hoping to mend it. I was driving toward myself. And that was enough. More than enough. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved, just to save yourself? Tell me your story in the comments below. And if this hit a little too close to home, you're not alone.